October 26th, 2025, 2:37 in the morning, western Moscow. Streetlights flickered on wet asphalt as a white flash pulsed above the tree line and rolled into a low thunder. Within minutes, sirens rippled across districts, and the calm of the capital gave way to hurried radio traffic, shuttered runways, and the metallic bark of guns on the ring roads as radar screens filled with returns that crews struggled to classify. Russian authorities would later say large numbers of Ukrainian drones were headed for the region, and that most were destroyed before reaching central Moscow. Flights paused, and they attacked in long holds. Earlier episodes had shown how quickly Moscow's airspace could be throttled by drone alerts. On several occasions since 2023, departures at Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo, and Zhukovsky were suspended while air defenses sorted targets and debris paths. These pauses, sometimes brief and sometimes hours long, undercut the earlier aura of invulnerability around the capital and forced visible trade-offs between routine civil aviation and emergency interception corridors. Through that night and into dawn, official tallies fluctuated. Russian defense bulletins claimed well over 100 drones downed across multiple regions, with several dozen reported over the Moscow area during the worst waves that month. International outlets described queues in terminals, diversions to alternate airports, and passengers sleeping on tile floors while crews inspected impact sites. Discrepancies were common. Moscow's mayor often cited lower counts around the city than the defense ministry listed nationwide, and independent verification remained limited, but the pattern of widespread closures and alerts was consistent. Residents posted night vision clips and shaky phone footage of orange glows beyond warehouses and rail yards. In previous incidents, authorities acknowledged debris strikes and isolated fires in districts south and east of the center, even when insisting interceptors had performed as intended. Regional reports the same week pointed to drone activity from Belgorod through Bryansk and Tula, and separate blasts at industrial facilities had already shown how wide the perimeter of risk had grown since the first drones reached Moscow's business district in 2023. Before we continue, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. The Ukrainian goal was not to dominate the skies, but to saturate decision cycles. Russian bulletins in late May and July described nights with roughly 100 or more inbound drones across the country, including swarms aimed toward the capital. The operational idea was simple. When defenders must react at once in many places, each battery's radar and missile stockpile thins, and the probability that a few small airframes break through rises. Airports closing for safety became the visible marker of that strain. For urban defenses, classification is the fragile hinge. Small, slow, low-flying drones carry radar signatures that can blur into clutter from buildings, tram wires, and construction cranes. Analysts have noted that even advanced Russian systems built for the high-altitude threats face trade-offs against tiny targets in dense terrain, and that counter-drone performance depends on queuing, software filtering, and disciplined fire control rather than raw missile kinematics alone. Studies across recent conflicts show layered networks still leak when overwhelmed, especially at short range. Misidentification has real costs. The most documented example predates the mass raids. In April 2023, a Russian Su-34 accidentally released ordnance over Belgorod, carving a crater and injuring civilians. That episode, captured on CCTV and acknowledged by officials, underscores how fast-moving alerts can cascade into human error in crowded airspace. When interceptors are fired in haste, their debris, and sometimes their warheads, return to Earth somewhere. And in cities that somewhere can be a road, a roof, or a rail yard. Technical limitations feed into psychology. Reuters and other reputable outlets chronicled multiple nights in 2025 when Russian statements cited between roughly 100 and over 300 Ukrainian drones launched across many regions, with dozens reportedly intercepted near Moscow. Even if most were downed, the residual risk forced periodic stoppages at major airports. The signal to residents was blunt: distance no longer guaranteed insulation, and endurance, not single-event heroics, would decide who adapted faster. Ukraine's approach drew on cheap airframes, longer-legged one-way systems, and decoys designed to soak up radar attention. RUSI assessments and broader defense literature describe how small uncrewed aircraft now deliver a disproportionate share of attrition, not because they are unstoppable, but because they bend cost curves and stretch defenders across many axes, day after day. Even where long-range systems like S-400 excel against classic threats, sustained low-altitude harassment erodes reaction time and forces expensive intercepts against inexpensive objects. Russian forces continued to adapt. Point defense units like Panzer proliferated on rooftops and near strategic sites, and state media showcased new mini-missile canisters intended to improve magazine depth against swarms. Yet open-source research and industry analyses stress that hardware tweaks cannot substitute for reliable identification, resilient networking, and disciplined doctrine. When engagement logic is stressed by simultaneous tracks, even upgraded launchers struggle unless they are cued by a broader, well-synchronized picture. The geography of strikes widened beyond the capital region. Russian and Ukrainian sources documented blasts at oil depots, industrial plants, and air bases across Bryansk, Kursk, and Luhansk over the past 2 years, often without clear public attribution from either side. Reuters has repeatedly reported on fires, injuries, and emergency responses following drone activity in those regions, while Ukrainian officials kept direct claims sparse. The net effect was to push air defense posture deeper into the interior and to multiply the number of places that had to be guarded at night. Polling inside Russia reflected fatigue with protracted escalation. Levada Center data published in spring 2024 showed a slim majority favoring a transition to negotiations and under 2/5 favoring continued combat operations, a balance that later surveys suggested edged further toward talks by late 2025. These are snapshots rather than certainties, but they illustrate how repeated alerts and visible disruptions at home can shape public attitudes over time. Against that backdrop, the night of late October in Moscow was less an outlier and more a culmination. Russian statements spoke of triple-digit intercepts nationwide within hours. Civil aviation notices spread, and by morning, many flights resumed with caution. For Ukraine, demonstrating reach into the symbolic heart of Russia served tactical and psychological aims at once. For Russia, the imperative sharpened: accelerate counter-US integration, ration interceptors, harden infrastructure, and learn to live with the possibility that a few tracks will slip through any shield on a busy night. The mechanics behind saturation favored patience. Drone waves flown along different axes and altitudes complicate tracking by forcing radars to juggle the clutter and cross-sections that flirt with noise thresholds. Even when most objects are intercepted, the defender's expense ledger skews. One shoulder-launched missile or a medium-range interceptor costs far more than a small plywood airframe with a commercial engine. As long as the attacker can manufacture at volume, the economics push the defender towards smarter queuing, electronic warfare, and denial techniques that do not require a missile for every blip. Electronic warfare and cyber radio techniques increasingly influenced outcomes. Soft kill methods, GPS spoofing, data link jamming, and takeover tools reduce the need for explosive intercepts and limited debris, but required proximity, training, and clear rules of engagement in populated areas. Analysts warned that heavy jamming in cities could also degrade friendly systems, highlighting the constant trade-off between suppressing intruders and preserving the reliability of civilian navigation and emergency communications. Strategically, both sides learned that visibility matters as much as damage. A halted departure board in the capital can echo louder than a crater near a depot on the frontier. That is why nights of widely reported alerts, regardless of the precise tally, carried outsized informational weight. The Russian narrative emphasized resilience and high intercept rates. The Ukrainian narrative emphasized reach and pressure. Observers parsing credible outlets saw both dynamics in play, and the trend line pointed toward more frequent, more complex air defense nights across the Russian interior. Decision rooms in Moscow pressed into overnight mode as briefings stacked and phrasing hardened. Public remarks leaned on ritual words about resilience and deterrence, yet the subtext was unmistakable. Capacity must grow, response time must shrink, and the city must live with recurring nights of alerts. The political layer signaled continuity, while the technical layer scrambled for surge measures that could be fielded quickly without disrupting already strained industrial lines. In that space between message and mechanics, uncertainty lingered over how fast real change could arrive. The most immediate lever was dispersion. Batteries that once guarded only airbases or ministries were reallocated to cover transformers, fuel storage, and rail junctions. Mobile teams with compact jammers were paired with spotters on rooftops to shorten sensor-to-shooter loops. This helped at the margins, but created a shell game. Defend one node heavily, and another thins out. A city the size of Moscow cannot be wrapped in a single net. It must be managed as a living map of shifting priorities. For Ukraine, the calculus rested on compounding small advantages. A drone that costs in the low thousands of dollars can drain air defense inventories worth many times that sum. Add decoys, route variation, and uneven timing, and each wave becomes less about destroying a specific object and more about dilating the defender's attention span. Even near-perfect interception nights still impose fatigue, fuel burn, and runway interruptions that echo into the next day's logistics cycles far from the front. Industrial tempo became the hidden contest. Fabricators who can stamp frames, print housings, and assemble engines in small, redundant workshops are harder to disrupt than large, centralized lines. Designs evolve by iteration. Airframes stretch for more range, navigation stacks diversify against jamming, and warheads trade weight for reliability. None of this is glamorous, but it is how attrition campaigns actually scale, through thousands of modest choices that add resilience faster than a single breakthrough. Defenders answered with layered soft kill, spoofing drifts guidance off course. Uplink denial freezes a craft into safe mode. Protocol capture lands it. Those tools reduce debris risks in populated areas, yet they demand training and strict discipline to avoid fratricide against friendly emitters. City operators learned that electromagnetic brute force is a blunt instrument. Saturate the ether, and ambulances, tower beacons, or rail signaling may also suffer. Precision, not power alone, decides whether soft kill helps or harms. Airports became bellwethers. When departures halt and arrivals stack into holes, the city feels the war, even if no blast lands nearby. Ground crews pause to inspect taxiways for fragments, radar rooms recalculate approach corridors, and airlines weigh alternates. Each disruption is measured not just in schedule slips, but in confidence. Even when safety measures work, the memory of seeing departure boards stalled in the capital sharpens the public sense that the conflict has reached into daily life. Information space remained a battlefield of its own. Official bulletins emphasized tallies of destroyed targets. Independent monitors focused on smoke columns, temporary closures, and the noise over sleeping districts. Both pictures contained true parts of a larger reality. Interception rates could be high, and disruptions still significant. In the long run, the side that aligns messaging with lived experience tends to retain domestic credibility, especially when every balcony camera can publish within minutes. Commanders on both sides treated the autumn raids as rehearsal for denser skies. If swarms increase, scarce items are not launchers but cognitive bandwidth, deconfliction, and robust communications that do not collapse when one node fails. The ideal defense becomes a choreography. Early warning cues handheld teams, towers coordinate lanes, and fire control rules keep missiles from crossing into danger zones. Where that choreography falters, accidents grow more likely than penetrations. Urban physics complicates everything. Concrete canyons bounce radar beams, thermal plumes from heating plants confuse sensors, and power lines hide small composites until they are nearly overhead. Interceptors that detonate too low scatter shards. Ones that detonate too high risk leaving a still dangerous body to tumble. The least dramatic victories are best. A jammed craft drifting into a cordoned park, or a captured unit set down in an empty field under a searchlight, followed by methodical disposal. Strategists revisited target selection ethics. Strikes on fuel depots, rail nodes, and military aerodromes sit within classic definitions of military objectives. Strikes that risk civilian harm demand careful route planning and fuse choice. Modern conflicts live under bright scrutiny, and legitimacy is not a decoration. It is a force multiplier. The actor that can point to consistent restraint gains room internationally to keep adapting tactics while limiting diplomatic costs that might choke material support. Economists traced the secondary ripples. Nightly alert cycles incur overtime for first responders, extended shifts for controllers, and delayed freight that backs up distribution centers. Insurance models adjust, premiums tick upward, and planners bake buffer days into schedules. No single night causes a shock, but the cumulative effect bends supply chains. That slow bend becomes strategic when repeated often enough to alter how warehouses stock, how rail assigns locomotives, and how airlines roster crews. Russia's modernization drive followed two tracks at once. The short track added rooftop guns, new fuses, and compact missiles that are cheaper per shot. The long track sought software that fuses disparate sensors into cleaner tracks, shrinking false alarms without missing real ones. The first track is visible and politically reassuring. The second is harder and takes time. Lasting improvement comes when the second track finally overtakes the first and doctrine, training, and procurement converge. Ukraine's adaptation also had two faces. One was the visible expansion of ranges and headings, with coastal, northern, and eastern approaches mixing to complicate timing. The other was quieter, better mission planning, more robust navigation stacks, and disciplined throttle management to trim acoustic footprints near defended zones. The aim was not to make drones invisible, but to make them numerous, unpredictable, and cheap enough that each defensive response felt costly even when technically successful. Morale threads ran through every layer. Crews who sleep in shifts under sirens do not just lose rest, they lose sharpness, and sharpness is the currency of clean intercepts. Civilians who glance up at night and see tracer arcs soon internalize that threats are real even when impacts are rare. In that environment, leaders' words carry greatest weight when paired with visible procedures that make neighborhoods feel safer. Clear guidance, practice drills, and transparent timelines for restoring normal rhythms after alerts. International observers drew wider lessons. Large, expensive systems built for high-energy threats must sit beside nimble, low-cost counters tuned for small signatures. Stockpiles need two kinds of depth: missiles for the rare but dangerous objects, and abundant non-kinetic tools for the nightly noise. The cheapest improvements are often procedural: better deconfliction, realistic training, and open channels with civil aviation. Yet those yield outsized gains when hardware is already stretched. The political symbolism of raids near the capital magnified each technical point. Leadership appearances stressed firmness and continuity, but the image that stuck with many was the map of rings around Moscow lit with alerts. That image communicates a new normal more effectively than any speech can. Once a population has seen its core airspace periodically constrained, it does not forget. Policy then flows from that memory, shaping budgets, laws, and procurement priorities for years. Ukraine's planners likely saw three horizons forming one continuous strategy. The first was nightly pressure to keep Russian defenses thin and reactive. The second focused on slow attrition, draining logistics and forcing costly redeployments that supported strikes on Ukrainian cities. The third was persuasion, showing the Russian public that the war's costs had reached their own skyline. These horizons reinforced one another. Pressure exposed weaknesses, attrition deepened them, and persuasion reframed danger as mutual rather than distant. Each night of tension became both a military and psychological front, where technology and perception intertwined to reshape how two nations understood safety, reach, and control. For Russia, the objectives mirrored those of its adversary in structure, but not in tone. The first was harm reduction, minimizing debris and restoring normalcy quickly. The second was resilience, hardening nodes, spreading assets, and securing essential power. The third was deterrence signaling, crafting the image of calm capability without escalation. Over time, both sides learned that true strength lay not in spectacle but in rhythm, how predictably a city recovered after alarm. Air defense in this new era is as much about human steadiness as machinery. Each silent dawn over Moscow now carries the lesson that in modern war, survival belongs to the side that restores order fastest and fears least.